My name is Dr. Jason Aukerman. I'm a clinical assistant professor of American Studies and English at Indiana University, Purdue University, Indianapolis. And I'm also the director of the Ray Bradbury Center, where we curate a large part of the material legacy of Ray Bradbury. We've recreated his basement office with entirely original artifacts, and we've got about 150,000 pages of his papers, early story drafts, things that were never published, incoming correspondence, one of the larger single author archives in the United States. It really goes back to the early 90s when Dr. Jonathan Eller came to IUPUI. Dr. Eller was wrapping up a 20-year career as an intelligence officer in the Air Force. And while he was in the Air Force, he got his PhD. And the last few years, he was teaching at the Air Force and Naval Academies. While he was in the Air Force, he got to meet Bradbury. They became very good friends. And John Eller really focused his scholarly attention on Bradbury. I would say that in terms of academics, there's nobody more knowledgeable in Ray Bradbury than Jonathan Eller. So he got to IUPUI in the early 90s. In the mid to late 80s, Bill Tupons also joined the faculty at IUPUI. He was the first person to do his doctoral dissertation on Bradbury. So just by pure serendipity, two of the world's leading scholars on Bradbury are right here on IUPUI's campus. And they were frustrated because Bradbury does not get a lot of attention in the ivory towers of academia, or at least he didn't at the time. Intellectual friendship formed between the two. They established the Bradbury Center in 2007. And really, we had a pretty robust reference library, a very, very small archive. We had very few papers. And Bradbury was still alive at the time and was very complimentary of our work. And in fact, paved the way for us to do some of the things we did. Our goal was just to increase academic attention on Bradbury. So we established the New Ray Bradbury Review, a scholarly journal, and we started doing the Collected Stories of Ray Bradbury, a critical edition. And that was our primary work. 5 years after the center was established, the world lost a creative genius when Bradbury passed away. And about a year after that, Bradbury's family and his best friend and principal bibliographer, Don Albright, collaborated on a gift to the Ray Bradbury Center. It was then called the Center for Ray Bradbury Studies. It was it's valued at $7.8 million. The office furniture, his working library, hundreds of his awards and mementos, stuff from NASA, because he had a big role in advocating for the American space program. All of a sudden, we are not just a research hub for Bradbury, but we're also an archive and a small museum. And we're wearing a lot of different hats. And so Dr. Eller retired in early 2021. I stepped into the director role at that time after basically apprenticing under him and for about a half a decade. And our focus right now is public outreach. Bradbury's associated with 4 principal causes or ideas: freedom of imagination, freedom to think, freedom of speech, First Amendment rights is one. His advocacy for space exploration. We need to explore the cosmos and understand our place in it. He was a huge defender of public libraries. He never went to college a day in his life, a Pulitzer Prize-winning author. But he said he got his education by going to the public library on a near daily basis. And he said he graduated from the public library at age 27. He felt like he owed the public libraries a huge debt. And so he was always advocating for public libraries. And then finally, literacy is our best technology. And it's that last point that the Bradbury Center is really focused on, is promoting literacy. From the 1970s on, Bradbury could command a lot of money for speaking engagements. I don't think he ever took a dime from public libraries, and he was constantly doing programs for them. So, if the LA Public Library needed to raise money, Bradbury would show up and speak. And he was always off the cuff, but completely coherent and inspiring and charismatic, and allowed uh, the the library to basically reap all of the proceeds without having to give anything back to him. I'm teaching a course on banned books right now. It's called Banned Books in the Literacy Crisis. We started the semester with Fahrenheit 451, and we just finished Handmaid's Tale last week. So I love that you're bringing that connection. So many of my students saw the connection right away as well between these two works. Margaret Atwood has reminisced about reading Fahrenheit 451 when she was young, past her bedtime, staying up, hiding under the covers with a flashlight, just mesmerized by Bradbury's narrative. So there's no doubt that Bradbury was a significant influence on Margaret Atwood. And you're right, thematically, there is a lot of overlap. Both of these are futures that I don't think anybody wants to live in. Bradbury was fond of saying when people asked him, 1948, he imagines smartwatches. In his story, I think it was first published in 48. It's called The Murderer, and a variety of other technologies. Being constantly connected, knowing mundane things about everybody's life, and never having a break from it, which totally anticipates social media. And people would ask him, how did you do it? How did you predict the future? And his response was always, my goal was never, ever to predict the future. I wanted to prevent certain unsavory futures from happening. And so I think the implied question is, are we living in the world that Ray Bradbury and Margaret Atwood have tried to prevent? And I would say we're well on our way. We're not there yet. But we've taken steps in bad directions recently. In terms of what I think about what's happening, I'm absolutely appalled by it. It's perfectly fine for a parent to say, I'm raising my kid a certain way. I don't want them reading this particular book. It is a very different thing. And don't get me wrong, I disagree with the parents who do that, but I think that I'm willing to concede that. What's not okay is for a parent to say, I don't want my kid reading this book, so no kid should be able to read this. I was talking about the banned books course with family members as I was prepping for it over Christmas break when we got together around the holidays, and one of them said, well, I don't really mind what's going on here. The important thing is that the books are age appropriate. And who gets to make the decision about what's age appropriate? As far as I'm concerned with my kids, if the kid's old enough to read, every book's a children's book if the kid can read, to quote Mitch Hedberg. I've never denied them access to any information. I've always encouraged them to pursue their interests and their curiosities. I think he would defend libraries and librarians to the bitter end. You're right. I cannot speak for him, but based on what I know of his legacy, the correspondence that I've read, the things that he wrote, I cannot imagine him being okay with what's going on in any way, shape, or form. I think that Bradbury's legacy, his example, the things that he stood for, he's a beacon for those of us who are concerned about what's going on right now. He's the lighthouse, or a lighthouse. And he imagined a future where the things that are being implemented now are carried out to their logical conclusion. And it's not a pretty future. I think Fahrenheit 451 remains a seminal text for very good reasons. It's relentless advocacy for literacy, the written word, the right to tell stories and not have those stories censored. You know, one of my favorite lines from Fahrenheit is when Montag says, "We need to be really bothered once in a while." When was the last time you were bothered by something real, by something that mattered? But the banned books course have heard me say that in weekly lectures over and over again because we're reading banned books. They've been banned, they've been challenged for a reason. There's upsetting content in them. I think the driving force behind banning books is they disrupt certain narratives. One of the books that I assign in the course is Lowen's Lies My Teacher Told Me, where he basically interrogates the way that history is taught in high schools, and points the flaws. You know, there is this constant insinuation when you encounter history as a high school student that if America ever did anything bad in the past, that it's been corrected, and that our story, the story of the United States, is a story of continual progress and continually getting better. And they leave out a lot of sordid things that would challenge that insinuation. And Lowen highlights that. And the reason I've assigned that in the banned books course is because I want people to think about, you know, when you read I Know Why the Caged Bird Sings, when you read Slaughterhouse-Five, when you read Fahrenheit 451 or The Handmaid's Tale, what narratives are being challenged? What are the safe narratives? What are the things that people have gotten comfortable believing, that these things come in and shed a new light on and say, okay, it's not as rosy as we may think. People don't like having the story that they tell themselves about themselves and about their country disrupted. Fahrenheit 451 was censored at one point. The Ballantine Press had a line called the Bal High editions that were written for high schoolers, and they were trying to anticipate challenges to Fahrenheit 451 and other books. And so they, I think they made something like 110 changes in Fahrenheit. And made those the high school editions so that parents wouldn't get riled up. They took out all of the swear words. Any insinuation of sex or sexual innuendo was changed. Any reference to drugs, drinking, or suicide was changed. But, you know, so instead of saying he woke up with a hangover, he woke up with a headache. It was mild changes like that. So there's a censored copy of a book about censorship being given to high school students. There was a teacher that was doing a read aloud in his class, and some students raised their hands and they're like, wait, your version's different than ours. Ours doesn't say this. And so they wrote to Bradbury and inquired. And through that inquiry, Bradbury found out that not only had his book been censored for high school students, but somebody screwed up at the press. And every edition of Fahrenheit, I mean, for like 5 years that was printed was censored. So it wasn't just the high school students that were getting the censored version. Anybody who bought Fahrenheit was getting the censored version of it. And Bradbury was absolutely livid for good reason.
And what you were talking about with high schoolers, I just wanted to show you for my high school graduation, my mentor and favorite teacher gave me a copy of Fahrenheit 451, and this is the copy. And he wrote to me in it and said, as you read this, remember that the prohibition on books in the story was a product of a democratic vote, not a totalitarian regime, something to think about as you go off to school for journalism. And now I'm on year 4 of journalism, doing this project at a time where we do live in a democratized society, and that is being threatened. And so I find myself revisiting this book a lot, and the words of Ray Bradbury. So I think that the work that you're doing of keeping his legacy going is really, really fantastic and is going to become even more and more important in the years to come, because I think about it all the time when I keep this book with me.
Have you read the foreword to that book by Neil Gaiman?
If I did, it was when I read it years ago. Let's
Yeah.
see.
I'll
Introduction
just,
to Neil Gaiman.
yeah,
Read it.
he's got a great line in there.
I found
Oh, nice.
says written ideas are special. They are the way we transmit our stories from our thoughts from one generation to the next. If we lose them, we lose our shared history. We lose much of what makes us human, and fiction gives us empathy. It puts us inside the minds of other people, gives us the gift of seeing the world through their eyes. Fiction is a lie that tells us true things over and over.
Yeah.